Hello, everyone, and welcome to On the Safe Side, a monthly podcast hosted by the editors of Safety and Health magazine, the official magazine of the National Safety Council. This is Barry Botino, associate editor at Safety and Health. With me for the final time in 2025 are my fellow associate editors, Kevin Drewley and Alan Ferguson. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello there.
Hi, Barry.
We're thankful that you've joined us for our December 2025 episode, number 70 in the history of our podcast. This month's episode is sponsored by Vietas. We'll tell you more about them in a little bit. Many of you in listener land have had a unique journey into the safety profession, and we'd like to hear all about it for the My Story feature in our magazine. You can submit a personal story or encourage a safety colleague to do so by emailing us at safehealth@nsc.org. In this month's episode, we'll examine some highlights from the December issue of Safety and Health and have an expert discussion about the annual OSHA Top 10 with our NSC colleague Jay Vietas, the Council's Senior Director of Research. We'll also share some stories you may have missed in our monthly In Case You Missed It segment. Is everybody ready? Away we go.
We start the December issue with the annual OSHA Top 10. Kevin provides a smorgasbord, a plethora, a panoply, and an extravaganza of fascinating information in this edition. Along with the always popular Top 10 most frequently cited standards, there's also a breakdown of which industries received the most citations for each part of the Top 10. Additionally, there's a Top 10 list of standards with the highest cumulative proposed penalties. And just to let you know, the top 4 standards on that list feature combined penalties of tens of millions of dollars. On top of that, there's a top 10 list of the most cited standards by OSHA region. But wait, there's more. There's also top 10 lists for serious and willful violations for fiscal year 2025. And we thank the good folks at OSHA for generously giving us all of this information to provide to you. If that wasn't enough for the December issue, there's a story from me about overcoming safety resistance. That pushback to a new safety rule, procedure, or even personal protective equipment is not surprising, said one source in the story who likes to flip the scenario around. Let's say someone comes to you on your job that you've done for years and says, here's a new way you have to do this task, and I think it's better. Why should that employee just take your word for it? And that's why one of the first important steps is to identify barriers to compliance ahead of time. Look at what's going to make this new procedure, etc., difficult, one source advises. Then naturally, employers need our old friend, engagement with workers, to ease the transition. They should also accentuate the positive aspects of any change and avoid simply punishing for noncompliance, and they should take time to review what's working and what's not with any change. Most of all, safety pros should know that resistance is valid information, feedback, or concern. Quote, instead of thinking of resistance as something we need to squash down, it's something we need to meet, understand, and then address, one source said. Finally, the December issue contains a wrap-up of the 2025 NSC Safety Congress and Expo held in September. It features excerpts of many of our show daily stories and lists all of the awards that were handed out in Denver. There's also much more in this issue of Safety and Health, which you can find in your mailbox or at safetyandhealthmagazine.com.
Vietas helps safety professionals ensure that their entire supply chain is ready to work, protecting people and profits while preventing costly project delays. Streamline your pre-qualification and compliance process with solutions that give you actionable insights at the worker and the work site level. With over 130,000 verified suppliers and 5,000 hiring clients, Vietas network helps eliminate friction and uphold safety standards. Learn more by visiting aveta.com. That's AVETTA.com.
A few moments ago, Alan lavished several appropriate words to describe the wealth of information related to OSHA's top 10 most frequently cited standards that appears in our December issue. As always, we thank OSHA for its assistance and expertise, the unique partnership between the agency and Safety and Health that allows for the annual presentation at the NSC Safety Congress and Expo wouldn't exist without it. In recent years, we've also gladly extended the top 10 gratitude to NSC's research department. That team has made the presentation, The Injuries Behind the Citations, a new staple during the top 10 session at Congress. This year, Jay Vietas, Senior Director of Research at NSC, took the dais, citing assistance from NSC Statistics Manager Ken Kolash. Assistance with the figures, that is. Jay was walking just fine on that Denver day. In this segment, Jay joined us to discuss more about injury data from NSC, how it might be associated with OSHA violations, and also some takeaways for safety pros. Hello, Jay, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Safe Side.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
All righty. Well, before we dive in, Jay, what should listeners know about the link between citations and injuries, and really why should it not be considered a one-to-one relationship?
The number of citations reported by OSHA are a function of the enforcement of existing regulations. While the number of reported injuries and fatalities from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they are reported annually through the Survey of Occupational Injuries and Illnesses. They should not be considered a one-to-one relationship for a number of reasons. OSHA regulations do not cover all conditions which could result in injury, and just because there are conditions where standards are violated, the outcome of injury may or may not occur. Furthermore, details behind the collection of data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics matter. The Survey of Occupational Injuries and Illnesses is an estimate based upon the extrapolation of the sample size or employer-reported data, while the Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries is a multi-data source census of all workplace injury fatalities and is much more accurate.
Jay, as you and our audience are aware, fall protection general requirements was the most frequently cited OSHA standard for the 15th straight fiscal year, and it remains the leading cause of worker death. Could you tell us more about falls and which standards are associated with injuries and fatalities?
Yeah, glad to. Falls, particularly from height, remain a leading cause of worker death. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 885 deaths from falls in the United States in 2023. 173 of these fatalities related to ladders and 62 involved scaffolds. And while many of these fatalities occur from work in the construction industry, it's not limited to this sector. Situations which increase the risk of falls from height include insufficient or ineffective planning, which is associated with a lack of fall protection use. Other factors include poor site conditions and lack of proper lighting, lack of or improper training of workers on the use of equipment, and this is specifically ladders and scaffolding, as well as characteristics of the worker, including their age, their health status, and especially their fatigue level. Of course, the type of work performed at height can contribute to risk of a fall, so it remains important for safety professionals to understand how and where the work is being performed to evaluate risk and provide recommendations for minimizing or even eliminating the hazard. And there are a number of standards from OSHA associated with fall protection. Let me quickly try to summarize the ones often most cited from the construction industry. They include OSHA 1926 Subpart M, which covers fall protection. And within that section, there's 1926.501, which mandates comprehensive fall protection for construction workers. There's also .503, which requires employers to train workers exposed to fall hazards. And then there's OSHA 1926 Subpart L, which covers scaffolding. And within that subpart, there's .451, which sets scaffolding requirements, including construction capacity, access, and inspections. And then there's OSHA 1926 Subpart X, which covers stairways and ladders. And within this section, there's 29 CFR 1926-1053, which governs all ladders, whether they're portable, fixed, or job made, as well as within 1060, which covers ladder training. I think it's also important to add that this was for the construction industry, and that for those in general industry, many of the fall protection requirements can be found in 29 CFR 1910 Subpart D.
Violations involving control of hazardous energy and machine guarding also have high potential for injuries, given the exposure to electricity, powered equipment, and other factors. What lockout, tagout, and machine guarding insights do you have?
Yeah, so control of hazardous energy, frequently referred to as lockout, tagout, and specifically defined by OSHA in 29 CFR 1910-147, remains an OSHA Top 10 cited requirement. In 2023, there were 48 deaths associated with struck by running powered equipment and 142 fatalities associated with exposure to electricity. Now, these requirements create a systematic safety process for isolating energy sources, prevent an unexpected startup or release of stored energy during servicing or maintenance, And ultimately, these efforts protect workers from severe injuries such as crushing, electrocution, burns, and amputations. Now, machine guarding requirements can be found in 29 CFR 1910-212, and they're there primarily to protect workers from injuries caused by moving machine parts and associated hazards. And this includes preventing direct contact with dangerous areas like points of operation, rotating parts, and pinch points. They're also there to reduce an accidental activation of the machine itself, to contain hazards such as flying chips, sparks, or even broken parts from impacting workers.
Respiratory illnesses also are prevalent among workers across numerous industries. How does this relate to violations involving OSHA standard on respiratory protection?
Consistently, OSHA's respiratory protection standard, 29 CFR 1910-134, is one of the top cited standards. And as many listeners know, effective use of respiratory protection requires the development and implementation of a respiratory protection program. And each of the elements of the program provide opportunity for citation, including ensuring the correct respirator is used, workers are trained on how to wear, maintain, and store respirators, as well as ensuring workers are healthy enough to wear a respirator. Now, from a respiratory illness perspective, respiratory protection can protect from exposures to airborne bacteria or viruses. And this relates to some of the illnesses observed in industry. And in 2023, there were a total of 125,000 reportable cases of these illnesses. Now, while these numbers are important, they don't tell the whole story regarding the value of the respiratory protection program. A number of exposures in the workplace, which are reduced through the use of respirators, relate to chronic disease, or disease which typically takes years of exposure for disease to develop and present.
Jay, we know that there are fatality events that aren't part of the top 10, but that are still of great concern to workers. Things like transportation incidents, workplace violence, and musculoskeletal disorders. What can you share about those worker concerns?
Yeah, I'll start by acknowledging that there were 4,543 preventable workplace fatalities or worker fatalities recorded in 2023, and 1,942 of them were related to transportation incidents. 1,369 of them, or 30% of the overall fatalities, were associated with motorized land vehicles. And this rate has not significantly changed over the past 20 years and continues to be a real opportunity for safety professionals, particularly in certain industries and workplaces. Another area of concern is that there were 740 workers who lost their life in a workplace violence incident in 2023. 458 of these were homicides and 281 were suicides. And some of the factors associated with these incidents include worker well-being, workplace security, and policies associated with handling or reporting aggression. And finally, there were more than 1 million reported overexertions, which resulted in days away or days restricted or days transferred from work. And this really highlights the significant burden from musculoskeletal disorders. And although the general trend has been positive, it remains an opportunity for improvement. Now, all these issues may lack the same gravitas from a compliance perspective, but they provide significant opportunity for safety professionals for engagement and the reduction of injuries and illnesses in our workplaces.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jay. This was a great conversation, a lot to unpack and a lot for folks to think about, and some great takeaways. We appreciate your time and expertise.
With thoughts about what to buy your Uncle Jack, Aunt Linda, kid sister, picky niece, or various other loved ones dominating your brain, it might be easy to miss news from around the safety world. That's why we're here with In Case You Missed It. And I'll start. In case you missed it, David Keeling is officially sworn in and on the job as the head of OSHA. The Department of Labor made that announcement November 5th during the recent government shutdown, which ended after 43 days on November 12th. And Keeling is the 14th Senate-confirmed leader of OSHA and takes over from acting leader Amanda Wood-Lyhow, who spoke on behalf of the agency in September at this year's NSC Safety Congress and Expo in Denver. As I'm sure many of you know, Keeling is a former safety executive at UPS and Amazon and is the former chair of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Safety and OSHA Subcommittee. Kevin, what about you?
Well, I was looking to highlight briefly a recent video that was released from the New York State Department of Transportation that gives a little behind-the-scenes look at commercial vehicle inspection stations and the role they play in roadway safety. some of our listeners are probably in the transportation industry, and others it might not be as familiar. So maybe if you're taking the freeway either to go home or to buy a gift for Uncle Jack or your kid sister, you're kind of seeing more trucks out and about, and they're certainly part of the component with holidays and just everything getting shipped from here to there. But it's an interesting peek. It's just about 2 minutes, but it just gives a look at what goes on at these stations. And again, this one is in New York. It just shows screening technology in action and how it reads license plates and checks the height and weight of these trucks. Also, there's a little bit of a look at it, what a visual examination entails from the tech and how they will walk underneath the truck in the inspection pit. We can write about these things and read about them, and they can be numbers and data, but just it was a really, I thought, an interesting peek into what was going on behind the scenes. Barry, how about you?
Well, as our listeners are headed over the river and through the woods this holiday season, I wanted to share a little something. A new study by a kind of a group from a number of different countries. This is via the American Psychological Association, and they had a group study 604 different studies, which involved about 894,000 participants from 30 countries. And what they found with workers is those who feel supported by family, friends, and colleagues have better mental health and perform more effectively on the job. And I know that support means a lot to different people, means different things to different people. But what the study did was they focused on perceived support. And what perceived support is defined as is that's the belief that help would be there if it's needed. And they've studied this in 5 different categories: work performance, risk-taking behaviors, mental health, physical health, and educational performance. And what they found is perceived social support was most strongly associated with both mental health and work performance. So as we all probably can imagine, having some support at work is really important, but also having that support away from work can make you more effective as a worker.
Is there something you think we missed? Let us know at safehealth@nsc.org and check out all the news from around the safety world at safetyandhealthmagazine.com.
Thank you so much for joining us for this month's episode of On the Safe Side. We know your time is extremely valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of it with us, wherever you choose to listen. You can check out any of our past episodes by visiting safetyandhealthmagazine.com/podcasts. That includes episode 16 from June 2021, where we discuss hazard communication training and the challenges and opportunities for women in safety. The original music for this podcast was composed by Steve Maslin. Thank you so much, Steve. And as always, we thank our NSC cohorts behind the scenes who help make this podcast go. And a special thank you goes out to our sponsor of this month's episode, Vietas. Learn more about them at vietas.com. We'll be back next month and next year, wink, wink, to have more safety-related discussions, talk to trusted voices from around the profession, and hopefully make you smile a little. Until then, best wishes for a smooth transition into 2026. And as always, please stay on the safe side.